Have you ever wondered why a man grows silent, evasive, or strangely defensive when faced with a woman who is no longer swayed by his charm, his promises, or his shadows? Beneath his words, beneath his controlled expressions, something ancient stirs, a hidden tremor that even he cannot name. The untouchable woman is not merely a figure in his life. She becomes a mirror, a revelation, and an indictment of all the illusions he has built to shield himself from his deepest fears. Her presence shakes the fragile architecture of his ego, forcing him to confront truths he would rather bury in silence. When a woman becomes untouchable, she withdraws her need for external validation. Her power is no longer chained to his approval, his attention, or his pursuit. She embodies what Jung called the individuation of the self, the painful yet liberating process of integrating her own shadows, reclaiming the fragments of her worth, and standing sovereign in her being. And it is precisely here, in this terrifying independence, that the forbidden truths men hide begin to surface. He will not speak them aloud, but they thunder within his psyche. They haunt him in the solitude he cannot escape. The first forbidden truth is his fear of irrelevance. To a man conditioned by centuries of dominance, the thought of not being needed gnaws at his unconscious like a hungry wolf. His pride depends on being the provider, the protector, the axis around which a woman's world revolves. But when she walks away from this gravitational pull, he is left adrift in his own orbit. Suddenly he realizes that her existence is not sustained by him, and that terrifies him more than any argument or rejection. Her autonomy exposes the hollowness of his assumed indispensability, and in silence, he feels himself shrinking. The second truth is his envy of her emotional courage. Men are often taught to wear armor, to battle the world with stoic silence, but few ever learn the bravery of entering the battlefield within. When she refuses to bow to manipulation, when she rises from heartbreak with a spine of steel, he is forced to acknowledge that her resilience outshines his. He envies her capacity to bleed openly and still walk forward unbroken. But envy, unspoken and hidden, curdles into resentment. He hides it behind dismissive laughter, behind accusations that she has become cold, when in truth, he knows her fire burns brighter than his concealed embers. The third truth lies in his confrontation with the shadow, not hers, but his own. In Jungian terms, the shadow is the dark twin of the persona, the repressed and unacknowledged parts of the self. When she becomes untouchable, she reflects his shadow back to him with merciless clarity. The manipulations he once relied on lose their power. The flattery that once made her glow now slides off her like rain on stone. She sees through the masks, and he sees his reflection in her eyes, unmasked, raw, and unworthy of worship. This reflection threatens his carefully curated identity. He cannot admit it, not even to himself, but her independence forces him to face the hollow spaces of his being. And yet, despite the weight of these forbidden truths, he hides them behind gestures of false indifference. He tells himself that he has moved on, that she was replaceable, that there are other women waiting in the wings. But deep within, the unconscious resists such illusions. The archetype of the untouchable woman imprints upon his psyche like a scar. She becomes the anima, the symbolic feminine within his unconscious, now unattainable, elusive, and forever beyond conquest. She becomes the dream he can never control, the haunting reminder that power rooted in autonomy cannot be subdued. If you have ever felt the sudden chill of a man pulling away, the odd silence after you refuse to compromise your worth, you have touched this dynamic without even knowing its name. It is not that he has lost interest, it is that he has lost the illusion of control. And this loss disorients him far more than rejection itself. He is not merely losing you, he is losing the reflection of himself that once existed in your need for him. That loss strikes at the very core of his identity, the place where ego and shadow wrestle in the dark. And here is where your power crystallizes, when you realize that his silence, his distance, his anger, or his attempts to belittle you are not confessions of your inadequacy, but of his. You are witnessing the collapse of illusions he cannot maintain in your presence. His forbidden truths are not yours to carry, nor yours to fix. They belong to him, and only he can summon the courage to face them. Yet, understand this, the untouchable woman is not cruel, nor is she heartless. She is simply awakened. Her detachment is not indifference but clarity. She knows that to give away her worth for scraps of attention is to betray herself. And so she steps back, not in bitterness, but in reclamation. She allows the forbidden truths to remain his hidden burden, while she walks unburdened into the fullness of her own life. There is a silence that follows the untouchable woman wherever she goes, a silence not born of emptiness, but of reverence. It is the silence of men who cannot speak the truths lodged in their throats, truths that would strip away their pride and leave them exposed. Within this silence lies the fourth forbidden truth, his terror of true intimacy. He may boast of desire, pursue pleasure, or wrap himself in fleeting connections, but intimacy in its raw and unguarded form unsettles him more than rejection ever could. When she becomes untouchable, she ceases to barter with affection. She no longer offers her body or her attention as currency to be weighed and measured. Instead, she demands authenticity, not with words, but with the sheer weight of her being. And this is where his heart falters. Because to meet her on that level, he must lower the shield of his persona, open the vault he has locked since childhood, and show the wounded boy that hides beneath the man's exterior. This unveiling is his most feared vulnerability, for he has been taught that weakness equals ruin. Better, he thinks, to hide, to accuse her of being too much, than to stand unmasked in her gaze. Jung observed that what is denied in the conscious mind is forced to live in the unconscious. So he denies his fear, but it lingers in his dreams, in the restless turning of his nights, in the hollow emptiness he cannot fill no matter how many victories or lovers he collects. She is the reminder that intimacy is not possession, but surrender. And surrender is the very act he resists, even as he longs for it in silence. Yet another forbidden truth stirs deeper still, his secret dependence on her energy. The fifth truth, the most concealed, is that men often feed on the emotional labor of women without naming it. He relies on her encouragement, her listening ear, her gentle acceptance, her forgiveness. These are the unseen rivers that keep him afloat. But when she becomes untouchable, she dams the river. She withholds her energy not as punishment, but as necessity. For she has realized that her worth cannot be drained to keep another alive. And in that moment, he faces the drought. He realizes that his strength was never entirely his own, that her nurturing, her attention, her constant giving was a silent pillar holding up the temple of his identity. This revelation is unbearable, and so he hides it. He may call her selfish, accuse her of detachment, claim she has changed. But in truth, it is not her change that frightens him, it is his recognition of dependency. For a man who clings to the illusion of autonomy, discovering that his emotional survival depended on her quiet offerings feels like a shattering of his sovereignty. And yet, it is precisely this exposure that has the power to free him, if only he dares to face it. You may have noticed this hunger yourself, though perhaps you did not have the words to name it. The constant pull for your attention, the way he seems restless when you are not available, the subtle expectation that you soothe his storms while he remains stoic. This hidden dependence is not a reflection of weakness alone, but of the human condition itself. We all seek nourishment from others. But the untouchable woman disrupts the imbalance. She demands reciprocity. She refuses to be the endless well from which he drinks without ever offering water in return. And here, the narrative twists. Because while his truths remain forbidden, hidden in the labyrinth of his unconscious, your truth emerges in radiant clarity. By stepping into untouchability, you embody what Stoics like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius echoed, that true power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering oneself. You stand sovereign not because you despise love, but because you no longer confuse love with servitude. You embody the paradox of freedom, that only when you stop needing do you become most desired. This is why his silence echoes so loudly. He may not admit it, but he feels the fracture of his illusions each time you walk away with unshaken steps. His forbidden truths are not revealed through words, but through the tension in his jaw, the sudden urgency to prove he has moved on, the performative indifference that masks obsession. You become both his haunting and his teacher, though he may never thank you for the lessons carved into his soul. For the untouchable woman does not linger in the shadows of regret. She rises, luminous and unyielding, reminding the world that her worth was never up for debate. Her power is not the domination of others, but the unshakable anchor within herself. And though men may hide their forbidden truths, she no longer bends beneath them. She walks on, leaving behind those who fear their own shadows, and stepping into a realm where love, if it comes, must meet her as an equal, never as a master. There is a strange paradox in the way men respond to the untouchable woman. Outwardly, he may insist that she has become arrogant, distant, unfeeling. Inwardly, however, he cannot release the imprint she has left upon him. His unconscious clings to her like a figure in a dream, because she represents not only the woman he could not control, but the self he could not master. She is no longer merely flesh and memory. She becomes symbol, an archetype lodged in the depths of his psyche, shaping his desires, his fears, his future choices. Jung described this phenomenon as the anima projection, the inner feminine image each man carries within. For most, it remains unconscious, projected outward onto women they meet, distorted by wounds and expectations. But when he encounters a woman who transcends his control, who refuses to be reduced to his possession, his anima awakens in a way that terrifies him. She no longer serves as a passive projection for his fantasies. She becomes a force, a mirror, a storm that dismantles his illusions. He cannot escape her image because, in truth, he cannot escape himself. And yet, he will rarely admit this. He hides it beneath bravado, behind new relationships, or within dismissive words. But his dreams betray him. In sleep, he may chase the shadow of the woman he could not possess. He may relive the sensation of her gaze, the weight of her silence, the untouchable fire that both drew him in and cast him out. In these dreams, he is not the conqueror. He is the seeker, restless, yearning, and incomplete. This is the torment of the forbidden truths. They do not die when denied. They fester, grow roots in the unconscious, and erupt in unexpected ways. For the untouchable woman, the danger lies not in him, but in herself. Because there will be moments when his silence, his withdrawal, his indifference tempts her to question her own power. She may ask herself, was I too much? Did I ask for too much? Am I unworthy of being loved fully? These doubts, however, are not hers. They are his, projected onto her like shadows stretching across a bright wall. His forbidden truths attempt to infect her certainty, to pull her back into the cycle of giving more than she receives. But when she remembers who she is, when she sees his silence for what it truly is, a veil hiding his fear, she refuses to shrink. She recognizes that the intensity of his reaction is not proof of her inadequacy, but proof of her significance. A man does not wrestle with what is insignificant. He only wrestles with what threatens the very foundation of his identity. This is why her power is so often misunderstood. People may call her cold, distant, too independent. But true independence is not coldness, it is clarity. It is the refusal to build a home on a foundation of illusions. It is the courage to walk alone rather than kneel for half-love. In a world where so many trade themselves away for crumbs of validation, the untouchable woman is fire, dangerous to those who cannot hold it, luminous to those who can. From the perspective of Stoic philosophy, she embodies the ultimate form of freedom, detachment from what cannot be controlled. Epictetus taught that suffering arises not from events, but from the judgments we place upon them. The untouchable woman lives this truth. She does not seek to control his forbidden truths, nor does she despair when he withholds them. She accepts that his shadows are his own, and her task is not to heal them, but to guard her own light. And yet, there is still compassion in her strength. She does not condemn him for his fears, nor mock him for his silence. She simply refuses to be diminished by them. In her detachment, she offers him an unspoken invitation: face your shadows or remain enslaved to them. Whether he accepts this invitation or not is no longer her concern. Her journey continues, with or without him. Perhaps this is the greatest lesson she teaches, that true power is never about domination, but about liberation. She liberates herself first, and in doing so, she shows him the path he could take if only he dared. But most men will not speak of this, because to admit it would unravel the fragile armor of their ego. And so the forbidden truths remain concealed, heavy in their silence, while she grows lighter with every step forward. The untouchable woman becomes a myth in his mind, but in reality, she is flesh and spirit, walking freely into a life defined not by fear, but by choice. And though his silence may echo behind her, she no longer turns back. For her worth is not written in his voice, but carved into her own being. The untouchable woman becomes the axis of a quiet revolution, not only within herself, but within the psyche of every man who crosses her path. She embodies what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole, of drawing together shadow and light, of stepping beyond the mask society has crafted. She does not arrive here without pain. She has walked through rejection, abandonment, betrayal, and the weight of her own doubts. But where others collapsed into need, she rose into clarity. And that clarity is precisely what unsettles him, for it exposes the hollowness of his own unexamined life. The forbidden truths men hide when faced with such a woman are not secrets of cruelty, but of fragility. The mask of strength slips, and what remains is fear. Fear of being irrelevant, fear of intimacy, fear of dependency, fear of seeing his shadow reflected back, fear of surrendering to a woman whose worth does not bend. He fears because he senses that to truly love her, he must first dismantle himself. And few men are ready for such a death of the ego. He hides these truths not only from her, but from himself. For to admit them would mean acknowledging that his identity was never as solid as he believed. To confess dependence would challenge his illusion of autonomy. To admit envy would fracture his pride. To reveal his longing for intimacy would contradict the armor he has worn since boyhood. So he buries it all, and in the burial, he suffers. But the untouchable woman does not suffer with him. Her suffering ended the moment she chose to release his validation as the measure of her value. She stands as a paradox, deeply capable of love, yet unwilling to lose herself in its pursuit. She understands that love, when it is real, does not demand the sacrifice of her essence. It expands her, uplifts her, and reflects her worth back to her. Anything less is not love, but hunger disguised as devotion. You may notice how men speak of such women long after they are gone. They call her unforgettable, even as they try to erase her. They call her impossible, even as they seek her again in others. This is because she has awakened something they cannot unsee. She has shattered the mirror of illusion, and no matter how many others they encounter, they cannot recapture the innocence of control. Once a man meets the untouchable woman, he is never the same. The Stoics understood this paradox too. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. When a man encounters a woman who refuses to be possessed, his thoughts begin to darken with both awe and fear. He may not change, but he is marked. And the mark she leaves is not of destruction, but of possibility. The possibility that there is another way to live, another way to love, beyond power and possession. For the woman herself, This realization becomes liberation. She no longer waits for someone to validate her worth. She no longer dilutes herself to be palatable, nor explains herself to those who cannot comprehend her fire. She knows now that the truths men hide are their burdens to carry, not hers. And in releasing herself from the weight of their shadows, she discovers the vastness of her own light. It is here that her power transforms from resistance to creation. She is no longer defined by what she refuses to accept, but by what she chooses to build. She creates love, but not from lack. She creates connection, but not from fear. She creates a life, sovereign and whole, where every step affirms her alignment with her own soul. And in this creation, she becomes untouchable not because she is unreachable, but because she cannot be diminished. And though men may continue to hide their forbidden truths, she knows now that their silence is not her prison. It is their confession. Every withheld word, every avoided gaze, every attempt to dismiss her strength, all of it speaks louder than honesty ever could. It says, "You have seen me in ways I cannot bear to see myself." The untouchable woman does not linger in pity for this. She walks on, carrying within her the rarest form of wealth, self-possession. And this, above all, is what terrifies him the most. For while he hides behind masks, she has become the maskless. While he fears the shadow, she has befriended hers. While he hides truths, she embodies them. And so the forbidden truths remain forbidden, locked in the chambers of his unconscious, until the day he dares to meet them face to face. But whether that day ever comes is no longer her concern. She has already crossed the threshold, and the horizon ahead is hers alone. There comes a moment when the untouchable woman is no longer defined by the man who could not face her, nor by the forbidden truths he hides within his silence. She has crossed into a new realm, one where her worth is no longer questioned, even by herself. This is the culmination of individuation, the point at which the fragments of her being converge into wholeness. She has embraced her shadow, her pain, her longing, and her strength. And in doing so, she has stepped into the rarest form of freedom, the freedom to choose, rather than to chase. The forbidden truths men conceal crumble in the face of this freedom. He may still wrestle with them, still deny them, still cloak them in bravado, but they no longer define her. For she understands now that his fear of irrelevance was never her burden, that his terror of intimacy was never a measure of her worth, that his envy of her resilience was never a wound she had to heal, that his hidden dependency was never hers to carry, and that his shadow was never hers to bear. All of these were his truths, not hers. And in seeing this, she severs the invisible chains that once tied her sense of value to his perception. Here is where rebirth begins. Not the rebirth that comes from external change, but the inner rebirth that arises when the soul sheds the weight of illusions. She no longer sees herself through the eyes of a man who cannot face her power. She sees herself through her own eyes, eyes that have witnessed darkness, yet chosen light. Eyes that have seen betrayal, yet chosen trust in herself. Eyes that have seen loss, yet chosen abundance within. This rebirth is not gentle. It is fierce. It is the fire that purifies the spirit, leaving only what is real. And what is real is her sovereignty. She no longer seeks to be everything for someone else. She no longer sacrifices her boundaries to keep a fragile connection alive. She no longer dims her light to make others comfortable. Instead, she stands in the full brilliance of her being, knowing that those who are blinded by it were never meant to walk beside her. And yet, in this fire there is peace. For she is no longer at war with herself. The voices that once whispered "you are not enough" have grown silent, replaced by the steady truth: you have always been enough. She does not need to prove, to beg, to cling. She does not need to perform worthiness in order to be chosen. She is already chosen, by herself. It is here that she embodies what both Jung and the Stoics pointed toward: the unshakable center of the self. Jung called it the self, the archetype of wholeness, the divine spark within. The Stoics called it living in accordance with nature, aligning the soul with its true order. Whatever the name, the essence is the same. A woman who knows her worth no longer bends to the illusions of others. She becomes untouchable not because she is unreachable, but because she is unshakable. The man who once feared her now becomes irrelevant in her story. His hidden truths may still haunt him, but they no longer haunt her. His silence no longer wounds her, his withdrawal no longer confuses her, his resentment no longer diminishes her. For she has learned the final and most liberating truth: she is not responsible for carrying the weight of another's shadow. And so she walks on, radiant in her sovereignty, at peace in her solitude, open yet unbound. Love, if it comes, must now meet her on equal ground. Not as master and servant, not as controller and controlled, but as two sovereign souls choosing one another freely. And if love does not come, she is no less whole. For she has already found the love that matters most, the love of her own essence, the love of her own life. This is the end of the untouchable woman's journey, yet also its beginning. For every step she takes now is chosen, not compelled. Every bond she forms now is mutual, not one-sided. Every truth she lives now is hers, not borrowed. She is reborn not as someone waiting to be chosen, but as someone who chooses. And in that simple, devastating truth lies her ultimate power. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.